Okay, so the first step I'm not going to necessarily go through. That's you selecting the images and working with them in Photoshop to convey a certain reading, whether that's a highly architectonic kind of reading like we did with the defrag images, or something else that may be a little bit more about an image, whether it's a figure or something along those lines. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. We've been doing that almost for every exercise. So the idea is to manipulate it to hopefully focus in on and exaggerate a particular reading of it. So in Rhino, determine the module size for the lenticular image plane, plane folding using simple surfaces. So the file that I gave you for Rhino includes this top row as an example. This is a little bit more complex of a lenticular example. You don't necessarily have to do that, but this is the straightforward one. I included this beginning module for you guys to work with. So I want you to be able to create the rest of these. And so the steps then would be, and I set this up, you don't have to keep this height. So basically what I did is at a quarter-inch, factoring a quarter-inch scale, this is the 11 by 17 sheet in this model, and I then divided it up with a 12-foot grid that's centered on that sheet. So if you measure this, it should be 12 feet. I then created another area, so there's going to be image that's viewed from one side and another image that's viewed from the other side, and then another field or transition image, and that's what this rectangle is referencing. It's actually not flat, but shouldn't really matter. Something else that disrupts that lenticular field, right? It doesn't have to be exactly that size. It could be another size, so you guys can make your own rectangle to do that. But I just put that in there as a placeholder so you know where to go with all of that. Also, the layers will be here available for you as well. So I'm going to just walk through the steps quickly. I'm just going to erase all this. So this is basically where you're going to be starting with. I'm going to copy this over just so I can track, or you can track my steps. Yes, I am. And I would, again, encourage you guys, you have your laptops out, you can find this file on BB Learn and walk through that, some of this with me as well. Okay, perspective view. So all I did here, this is all on a grid. It says grid, should be grid. Oops. So that's on the grid layer, and then I have lenticular 1, lenticular 2, 3, and so forth. You'll only need the one. The other additional lenticular layers is where I would have more than one pair of images. And so the red here would be one pair of images, the blue would be another pair of images, the green is a third pair of images. So just as an example, it could be a little bit more complex if you want to go above and beyond. But at the baseline, it's just a plane. That's the transitional image. That's an image that'll just be flat and red, straightforward, straight on. So it's meant to disrupt the rest of the lenticular folding and the lenticular field, I'll call it. So I'm making sure I'm on lenticular 1. That'll be the first pair of images. And I'm just going to make sure I'm zooming around this specifically. And I'm just going to extrude these curves. Now again, you could get in here, because this is all one curve right now, and turn on your control points with F10 or using the tool on the side here, and make them deeper or more shallow. You can change the spacing if you want it to be a little bit more broad. So you don't necessarily have to keep this as a module. Again, I want to just give you a good foothold on the exercise before moving forward. So you could use this, although I would encourage you to work with it a little bit. But all I'm going to do now is go to Surface, Extrude Curve Straight, and I'll just click here to complete the 12-foot module. And this part on the edge is fine as just showing the grid. So you don't necessarily have to fill in the whole area, just that centered area with the full 12-foot modules. So that was that first step, just to create the folds. And depending on the depth and everything, you're going to have that natural to the, of course, it's going to correspond with the curve that you create. Now I'm just going to copy this over again. And now what I wanted to do is trim out where that straight on, that third image is going to be. The image that's meant to be read straight on. So the way I'm going to do that in the top view is I'm just going to use the trim command. So I'll go into trim, select the cutting objects, which is going to be, in this case, this rectangle or whatever rectangle you create. I tried to make sure that this rectangle now was at least on a full module, so I didn't have a half of a folded piece here. So I would make sure to have it either aligned with the valley or the ridge of the folds. You could have it sort of interrupt and be a half, sort of a half module. That just makes things a little bit more difficult when you're laying out the imagery. You have to account for that. All right, so that's my cutting object and what I want to trim. And then we have the opening. And then from that, I can also create the area where that third image is going to be. And I'm just going to use a simple surface and make sure I'm on the right layer, which I think here I called it accent. Yeah. Accent image. And I'm going to click on that corner and just that corner and make just a simple surface. Now I know that's the area where that image is going to be. The next step then would be to unroll those folds, right? So then you can start laying out or have an outline for laying out the images. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to copy it over. So I'm going to grab the folds, copy it over. Or actually, I don't need to do that. Sorry. I'm actually just going to go right into the Unroll Surface command. So Surface, Unroll Developable Surface. I'll select that. I want to make sure it's not exploded. I want it to maintain connection, so they'll just be flat instead of a series of strips. And I'll right click, and that's what it created there. So now, pretty quickly, I have basically all the modules and the spacing flattened out, and now I can start working with it for the imagery. First I have to extract a grid, and there's a number of ways to do this. I could just draw other curves right over this, which if you just draw curves, it might go fairly quickly. You could also use the curve from objects, so I'll go curve from objects, and in this case I used extract wireframe. If I use the extract the silhouette, it's just going to give me the inner and outer rectangles of that, not necessarily the modules. So, but if I use the extract wireframe, it's going to give me all of that, and I can move that to the side. Yes. Sure. I'm just going to change the layer quick here to grid. I'll walk through it again. Okay, so this is the flattened piece. We did unroll the developable surface. Then I'm going to go to my Curve from Objects tool. And I'm going to select Extract Wireframe. Again, there are a number of ways you can do this, but that's the one I think is reasonable to use. I will have to erase some of the lines because it's going to include some of the surface lines as well. So I'll have to erase those. So Extract Wireframe. So now it basically took that surface and extracted all the wireframe, all that information. Now I'm going to move that to the side so I just have the grid. And right now it's on the flattened layer, and just because I'm a stickler for layer management, I put it on the grid layer. And now you can see I have all of the lines though. That includes these intermittent lines, so it's going to require me to go in and delete some of these, which doesn't take too often. It's just every other one. They're too long. And so forth. So you have to do that for all of them. The other thing that I would recommend to do is that the perimeter is just going to be the little fragments here. So I would recommend to go ahead and select this, either delete that line and just redraw it as a simple line, or join it. We'll type in join. These should be fine. It's just the top and the bottom. It'll be the same for this opening. And then I'll have to erase these middle lines here, because I don't need those either. Is there a question?
Yeah. Is there
there may be, although there shouldn't be multiple lines on top of each other through what I just did. So overkill is, if there's a lot of lines that are right over each other, it's going to reduce that to one line. That shouldn't be the case with this. What's that? It's not going to be detrimental for this. We're not laser cutting it, but that's something that ends up being a problem. Obviously, you can overkill it in AutoCAD, but I don't think we'll be using AutoCAD for this. Okay, so I'm not going to go through and erase all those lines, but you can see how that's done. So I want to make sure I have the right modularity. The other thing I have to keep in mind now, and this is where the numbering comes into play, is that I need to know which strip module belongs to what image and what that order is. And that's going to come into play a little bit later in terms of file types and everything else. And so I just went into the text tool, and you may have to adjust the height of this. I think 8 inches is what it's at right now, but here you can type in whatever it is. Let's just start with A1. Again, you could do this in Illustrator as well. For me, I just wanted to kind of do it right away so I didn't have to deal with it later, but it's up to you. Obviously, it's just an alternating pattern. Get on the right layer. That'll be A1. If I right-click, I can do that again, and either I can go into A2 or I'll start with the B1 as well. And then it would be A2 and so on. They would alternate. The tool is just this T on the side here. Text object.
Can you explain one more time why? Like, that's going to come later, you said?
Just to keep everything organized. So you know, because once you start, basically we're going to have to take an image and slice it up into these little strips. and it's pretty, I can imagine it being easy if there's not a naming convention that they could get messed up. Then you're investigating which image goes first. So besides that, if there's just a naming convention so you know what image strip goes in what slot here, it makes things a lot easier. So it's just a little bit of management. So I would do that for all of these, right? And also erase the rest of the lines. Now that's something I could then, once I'm through using that or finishing this out, I could take this now and export it to Illustrator. So I'll make that selection. I selected what I want to export, which is going to be all this line work. Again, for you guys, it's once you're finished working with it. Export selected. And I want to export it as an Illustrator file. Then, of course, you navigate to wherever you need that to be. Again, keeping your folders nice and neat is important as well, so you know what images are going where. In this case, I ended up calling the grid from Rhino, I just gave it a date, the year, and then the date. Rhino modules, and I just called it raw because it's not going to be coming into the right scale. I might have to scale it. So that's the way I saved that one, and then I use this other layout to then bring that into. So those are the steps I went through. I have this one open so I can show you how that went. I'm not going to necessarily export it here. So export it as a Illustrator file. Did you download it?
Yeah.
And it won't open?
No, it gives me a, could not find the link file. Choose your place to select into the file where you want to.
I'll have to relink that, I guess. So this is from the more complex one set up here. I just was taking this area, and so you can see it's all numbered out. But the first file that I got didn't look like this. What I did here, and let's see. I'm going to turn off the images. So what I did here is lay out horizontally the 12-foot grid. So in this case, that would equal at a 1/4 inch would be every 3 inches. There would be a line. Now, because I know that the folding works with the modularity of the 12-foot grid from Rhino, I didn't necessarily include those other verticals. You may want to do that, though, because I can imagine that once you fold, you want to be able to say, okay, well, once I get to A6 or whatever it is, that needs to align with the first grid line, the 12-foot grid line. And so the way I created these grids, or the guides rather, is I created a guides layer. Make sure I'm on that layer. And zoomed up as close as I could here. And again, all you do is go ahead to the ruler here, and if you don't have your ruler on, go into view, and then you can either show or hide rulers. This file should be set up already to inches, so you won't have to worry about the units, but if it was a fresh file, you may have to convert it to inches. Also, sometimes, I think I talked about this at some point before, sometimes the origin isn't where you want it. So you can see right here, I just moved the origin 0, 0 to like inside the page. So if you want to make sure that it's right at the corner of your sheet, you click here to the corner of the rulers. And basically, I can drag that out. So I'm left clicking, holding down, and dragging it out. And now I can relocate 0, 0. I want it to be right at that edge. And then for the vertical lines, grid points, I can just start laying that out with every 3 inches. So 0, 1, 2, 3. And then next one would be 6. And you can get a little bit more detailed with that, but so that'll lay out basically the 12-foot grid at a 1/4 inch scale. And the reason why I have it on a separate layer is sometimes I just don't want to look at the guides. Sometimes they get in the way, so you can turn that off. The other thing that I did to make sure that that grid was pronounced is to go ahead and draw a line on the grid. Because right now it's not going to show up as anything. So if I got to structural grid, I'm on the right layer, I have my line tool, and I should be able to snap to that. I guess I'll probably zoom out before I did this, but just go all the way down. There it is, and if I hold my shift key, I can pick it up right there. Now right now it doesn't have a stroke or anything, or it looks like it has a white stroke. So I want to make sure that that's black and it's thick enough that I'm going to be able to see it. So I think it's like a 3-point stroke on that. It's important that that comes through, and it's going to be important for the other grid as well, because when you're bringing it into Photoshop, and if it's just a line with no stroke on it, it's just a vector, it's not going to show up visually. So you're going to want to be able to use that. Okay, so there was the other file that I had, this raw one. Okay, so this is what I got out of Rhino. So again, it's not to the right scale or anything. So all I did, since I had that other one set up already, I'm going to take it and I'm just going to go Control C for a copy edit. So I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard. I'll go over here and then I can paste it. So there it shows up on whatever layer I'm on. And then, since I know, I'm going to do this from the top. I know the sizing of it that's going to relate to this grid I've already drawn, right? And so that top line from the grid I just got from Rhino is aligned with this grid, structural grid that I created, that horizontal line. Everything is selected with that object, so I know I can just take this now and drag that window, hold my shift key down to keep my proportion correct, and make sure it lines up with that bottom grid, because I know that that's the modularity coming from the Rhino model. If I put back to that, I can see that I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modules. And then I go back to Illustrator. Again, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modules. And I'm just going to tweak the scale of this. Again, hold my shift key down. Make sure that that's right lined up with that bottom grid, and it should be then to scale. The reason why I started with the top is because I don't want the numbers aligned with anything, and then if you scale from the bottom and line that up to the top, it's going to be off a little bit because it's scaling everything, and so I know that that top is where I want it to be, so that's why I work from first setting the top and then scaling the bottom. And then I can align this accordingly horizontally. So I can move this whole thing over. Oops, Control Z. You may want to group that. So I'll go into Object and Group. And now I can move it over to have it start with the vertical grid as well. I'll align that. I'm holding my shift key down to keep it going perfectly horizontal as well. Oh, it grabbed the other grid. That's what's happening. So you want to make sure you're not selecting this. What was happening is I was selecting that top one at the same time, so everything was moving over. But basically, I just want to horizontally shift it over to have that line, this far line aligned with that grid line, then I know where I'm at overall. Okay. I'm going to close this out. So that kind of goes through the scaling. I'm going to close this out and get back to where I was before. So you can notice I started to bring some images already in, some strips in from Photoshop. And I'm trying to keep that pretty well organized as well. So I have an image A layer I can turn on and off, and then I have another layer that would be then for the B image. So what I then did before I laid out those images is I saved this as it was because I didn't have any images. It was just the grid before. And all I did then was open that up, directly open it up into Photoshop. So if I went into my Explorer window here and I right-clicked, one of the options to open, if I go open with, is Photoshop. So it's going to bring that into scale automatically. So that's all I did. So then the grid was there. It was at the same scale as it was in Illustrator. So all of that matched up. And then what I had was the grid. I made sure that there was some thickness there. So I think I gave it like 1 point. So it's going to visually show up. So I have that and the overall image that I decided to use for this. Okay. So then from there, the process that I use to create all of these strips, and I'm keeping track because I can go back down and my numbering is there, right? So I know I'm on A3 or A2 or whatever it is. And what I found to be the quickest way to do this, now I have the image lined up laterally the way I need it to be, right? And it only gets a little tricky when the module changes. And so you can see here overall the height of these strips for 6 modules is the same. So essentially I can copy and paste that same module and then just move it into position. Once I change the module, I have to realign that image. So I have to kind of move it over and make sure that the modularity is lining up where I need to be. And then I could start working with those modules. So I got to the point where I have 2 strips into this next module, and I moved the image over, and what I decided to do was just give it a little bit of transparency, because if it's full bleed I can't see the strips, right? So if I knock that down a little bit, just in the layers here there's an opacity variable, so I can toggle that up and down. So I know what the background image is, and then I know where the strips are, and I can see the modules and everything pretty clearly. So the next module that I want to keep this continuity would be this strip right here, right? So this is the one I've already used. I need this next one over, and that's actually going to be in the next module over here. So all I did to achieve that. And I'm just making sure that I'm within the thickness of the line. I'm going to drag and use the marquee tool to copy and paste that. So if I just drag this down to the bottom of the window, it's going to automatically scroll for me. And I can line this up with the grid, and now I have that selection. Now I have to make sure that I'm on that layer where the image is. And then I can simply copy, so Control C, and then Control V, and it'll automatically create another layer. I called it layer 1. So I'm going to move it down here, and I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call it my A9, because that's the one I'm on. And then I'm going to move it to its proper location. So I'm going to have my selection tool, I'll hit V for that. Oops, I have to get on the right layer, and move that over. And you can zoom in to make sure it's really lined up and everything. There. So then if I turn that one off, I know that basically where that strip is, that's the next module I need. And so I'll go through that process again to make the next piece, move it over, and keep going accordingly. Once you get to where you're in this area, then you just have to take the main background image and move it to the side to make sure it lines up with the previous module, and then you can go through the same process. The other thing that I did to make things a little bit easier for myself, just in managing this, and to bring it back into Illustrator to make sure everything's laid out, because if you have two images working with this, I could see it getting kind of confusing. So you may just want to do this on separate files and bring everything together in Illustrator. So the way I decided to do that, I'm just going to turn off everything but the last one we just created. So A9. And I'm going to use my magic wand selection tool. I'm just going to select, make sure I'm on the right layer, select in the blank field there. So now it's selecting everything but that image. And if I right click, I can inverse that selection, so I'll just select the image. Now it's just right there. And all I'm going to do now is enter Control C for copy. And then I'm going to open up a new file in Photoshop. Now, if you've noticed with the print screens, basically that's copying an image to your virtual clipboard. And if you open up a new Photoshop file, Photoshop recognizes what's on the clipboard, and it's going to give you a canvas size that's aligned with the size of whatever the image is on the clipboard. So now this long skinny image, if I go into new, you can see it, the width is only 163, the height is 2,700, so it recognizes what I have selected onto the clipboard, to the copy C. It's going to give me that. Then if I enter Control V, it's going to put that image right in there. I can get rid of this background layer. I just double clicked on it, and I can call it something else, but I can just delete it. And now I can save this image, go into File, Save As. I'm just using a JPEG. This is probably, this is A5. I know that that one was A9. So now when I'm going to be reassembling these into Illustrator, I'm just assembling these strips, and I can move them around and align them the way I need them to be. This is just a preview. So then if I go back to the Illustrator file, and I'm on image A, the layer, I can just drag and drop this A9. Oh, I should have been able to. You had a question?
Yes. So why are you doing every other piece rather than the one trimester? Because there's those that have it on the side and the building. You would
I'm moving it over so it's continuous. So it's not going to have the other one. I'm showing it every other one because when I fold it, so if you imagine this is folded, I'm only going to be able to see this image on this side. So then I'll see this one and this one and this one. I won't see this part of the fold. That's for the other image. So I just dragged and dropped, the layer was off, that's why it opened it up as a new file. So I just dragged and dropped it into this now layout that I already had in Illustrator. And then I know that that was A9, and if I had all the labeling here correct, I could just put it into its A9 slot, wherever that was. The other thing that you can imagine that'll be an issue once this is all laid out, again, it's going to be wider than 11 by 17. So you either can do a larger plot of this, although Illustrator will let you tile the print. So this is however long I need it to be. And so I can ask Illustrator to tile this according to 11 by 17 and how the sheet is set up. So first, if you need to make the artboard wider, you can click this tool right here, which is the Artboard Tool. And on the top, and some of it's falling, where are the rest of my tools? It's because the resolution of this screen, there we go. It's usually a wider format, but in any case, I can adjust the width and the height of the artboard here. So once you click on that tool, that option is going to be there. You want to make sure in this case that these are not linked in terms of their proportions, because you just want to potentially make it wider, right? And so I can dial this up to whatever width I want, 36 or whatever. Let's do 36. So it just made the whole artboard that much wider.
Why would you want
Because the length of this is going to be, it's going to be wider than 11 inches.
Yeah.
And so in order to be able to print that out and lay them out, first of all, you need a wider artboard. And then to print it as one piece, then I can show you how to tile the print. Does that make sense? Okay, so the first thing in terms of setting this up, what you want to be able to do is set up the first tile. And all the tiling is just an option under the print. When you go to print, there's an option that says tile. But if the tiles aren't set up correctly from the beginning or the first tile, you'll get some curious results. So in this case, I'm imagining that because I just widened that board, it went off the edge here of the beginning, so that's why we have this white space. Well, let's imagine that this, again, starts right here at the edge. If I click this little corner notch by the hand tool, you can see there's a print tiling tool. And all of that is, if right now it's selected, I haven't clicked anything, but once I collect, you're going to see the size of the sheet that you have selected to print. So 11 by 17 was selected for this, and so now I have this portrait 11 by 17 outline that I can then align with the corner of the overall artboard layout, so that it knows that's the first tile. And then if I go into File and then Print, there you go. there's an option as you go down. This is set up for a laser printer, but it should be the same for PDF. And I'll go down here to do not scale, but I'll say tile full pages. So now you can see it's going to full tiles in terms of how it's going to print that. In this case, it looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiles. And then just like a print range, so say for example it was set up and you didn't want to mess around with the way it was set up already, you can select the tile range. So maybe I wanted to start with 2, I just want to print 2, 3, and 4. I can just say 2 through 4, and then it'll just generate that as a PDF. And then that's something as a series of files you can just take and get printed on 11 by 17s. The other option is to print it layout. I mean, you can use the large scale plotters, but of course that's a little pricier.